everyone, Deb Tucker here from Studio 180 Design. Today I'd like to introduce you to a new technique that we've developed to go along with our Star 60 tool. We call this technique Power Strip 60. And once you see this in action, you're going to understand right away why we call it a power strip. It's going to make your construction of the Star 60 units and what we call a shaded 60, similar to our shaded 4-patch, quicker and easier than you can ever imagine. So stay tuned and we're going to get right to it. So if you are familiar with our Star 60 tool and our Star 60 unit, normally when we build this shape, we are cutting each piece individually. We're cutting a diamond, then we're cutting 2 side triangles, and we're picking them up and sewing them one at a time to the diamond. With this Power Strip 60, we're going to be able to make this unit using strip piecing and do it much more efficiently, but we're also going to have the option of making what we call the shaded 60, which is one of our Star 60 units plus an additional triangle to give you some of the shapes that you see in the quilt that's behind me. First thing we're going to need to do, as always, is consult our technique sheet. And my hint to you is whatever size you choose, highlight it with an expo marker or a dry erase marker. That's going to keep you on track and not be looking at the wrong numbers on your chart. For today, we're going to be making 4-inch units for the Star 60, which will make this diamond actually end up being an 8-inch diamond. Now that we've chosen the size, the next thing we're going to do is consult the chart for the 3 different strip sizes that we need to cut. You'll need to cut 1 strip for the diamond, and it will be cut at 2 3/4 inches. You need to cut 1 strip for the side triangles. That's cut 3 3/4 inches. And if you're going to go on to create those shaded 60s, you need a strip that's going to be cut at 5 inches. We're going to put the 5-inch one off to the side for right now. The next thing you're going to do is to begin to strip piece these things. And if you look at step 1, it will show you that you're going to stagger the strips. And it wants you to stagger the strips so that they look like this, so that the diamond strip is a little bit further north than what will be the side triangle strips. Flip them over, line up the raw edges, stagger them, we say about half the width of the strip, but just down a little bit, line up the raw edges, and give those strips a nice, good, accurate 1/4 inch seam. You can see that I've already done that by the magic of television, but I've got my stitching line on there. When I go to press this, what I'd like to do is press that seam open. We do a lot of that open pressing in our Star 60 because what it does is it lessens the bulk. So there's what we want to end up with: a high diamond strip, a lower background strip, and a seam pressed open. Now that the stitching and the pressing are done, it's time to take these strips and subcut them. Your subcut will always be the same size as your diamond strip. In our case, we cut the diamond strip 2 3/4 inches. So our subcuts are going to be at 2 3/4 inch increments. What you want to do when you go to set this up is pay attention. We recommend that you put those strips wrong side up on your cutting mat. This is how you would do it if you're right-handed, so that you can cut from left to right. If you happen to be left-handed, go to our website, download those left-hand cutting instructions, but we have you set the strip up vertically so you can make your cuts comfortably left-handed. So I've got my strip on my mat. Next thing I'm going to do is use my Star 60 tool to help me set up a good 60-degree angle. If I take and put any one of those horizontal guidelines across the seam that's on my strip that's facing wrong side up, I have established a 60-degree angle on the edge. Now, I'm not going to try and get my cutter and cut that, but what I am going to do is take a regular ruler, butt it right up against the strip set, remove the Star 60 tool, and make a slice. Now I've just set up a 60-degree angle. I'm going to use that angle when I do my subcutting. Because I've got to cut straight lines, it's going to be real tough, almost impossible to do it with the Star 60. So that goes off to the side. What I'm going to do now is subcut at the 2 3/4 inch increment. So when I look at my tool, I have a nice 60-degree line here. Let me get this piece out from underneath. I have a 60-degree line that I tend to line up there, and I'm going to 2 3/4. Usually what I do is go to 3 and then back it down just a little bit to 2 3/4. So I'm lining up 2 3/4 there. I line up my 60-degree there, make my subcuts. And I'm going to work my way down through the strip, doing that same amount of cutting with the 60-degree angle. If you've got one in the middle on your tool, 2 3/4 going this way. If you don't happen to have a tool that has the 60-degree angle here, what I recommend is only doing about 3 or 4 subcuts before you take your Star 60 tool and reposition it and reconfigure that 60-degree angle so that you're not getting your pieces skewed in your cutting. So now that you have subcuts, you're going to need 2 subcuts to work through the rest of the process. 2 subcuts for each 2 units that you're going to end up making. I like at this point to flip those right side up, and then we're going to position them to make a pair, a set. And what I want to do is put one with the diamond pointing away from me and rotate and put the other one so the diamond is pointing toward me. This is a place where you're going to want to pay attention a little bit, because you could flip these over and end up putting one this way and end up putting one this way, and you see that your 2 diamonds are on the sides. If you do that, you're going to have to pull out that seam ripper and take them apart because it's not going to work. So again, point 1 away from you, point 1 toward you. You're going to simply flip them over so that they are right sides together. Stagger those ends so that you're about 1/4 inch with the stagger on those points, and then go ahead and do your stitching. Once you have your pairs stitched together, we're going to recommend here that you also press those seams open like you see in this shape. If you're familiar at all with our shaded 4-patch, this is where it's a little bit different in that we put a slit in that center section for our shaded 4-patch so that one seam would go one way and one would go the other. But because it's Star 60 and matching seams is almost impossible, it's just as easy to go ahead and press those seams open. So that's what we're going to recommend on this pressing step. Once you have your pieces stitched and pressed, now you have to choose. Do you want to go on to make just those regular, standard Star 60 units? Still oversized, still able to be trimmed down before you put them in your projects? Or do you want to go on to make that unit that we call the shaded 60? Let's talk about these one at a time. For your Star 60 unit, what you're going to do is, with the fabric right side up, or with the shape right side up, you're going to look at your Star 60 tool, and what you're going to look at on your Star 60 tool are those 2 broken lines that come from the base of the tool that are labeled flat edge trim lines. Those are the lines that are important when you're cutting these pieces apart. For a right-hander, I would set this up kind of in this angle so that when I place those guidelines, those flat edge trim lines onto the seams that I've already sewn, I can make a slice, and now I have one edge of my triangle precision cut. Before I go on to trim the rest of it, I would turn this around so that I could do the second edge, flat edge trim lines on the seam lines, make your cut. So now that edge is precise. To finish cleaning up the unit, what I'm going to do is do just what you're instructed to do in the regular Star 60 set of instructions. Making a 4-inch unit, what I'm going to look at on the tool are the 4-inch diagonal guidelines that are coming in from the side, and they meet with the 4 in the bottom. That 4 and those guidelines that are on either side of the 4, the diagonal guidelines, are going to line up on the seam lines. When I trim and trim, I am then going to have a perfect star 60 unit. But better than that, when I trim this one, I'm going to have two of them, just about as quick can be. Now, for those of you who might be left-handed, it's just slightly different. Don't forget we have those free downloadable instructions on our website. But instead of setting this up going in the upper right-hand position, if you were left-handed, I would switch and put that diamond pointing in the upper left-hand corner so that you can then do basically the same thing. Line up those flat edge trim lines with the seam lines and make a comfortable cut as a left-hander. So that's all you need to do to create loads of star 60 units. Now you come to the second option, and the second option is being able to create this unit, a star 60 unit plus an extra triangle with the same kind of strip piecing. So let's take our shape and we'll take a look at what we're going to do. To create that shaded 60, we're going to turn this wrong side up. And we're going to turn this wrong side up because what I want to do is actually mark a 60-degree line on the back of my pieced unit. So these units were constructed exactly the same way. For this one, being right-handed, this is the illustration that you see on the technique sheet. It will have you position this according to step 7. That's where we're at on the instructions if you happen to have those instructions and you're looking. I'm going to use or focus on the horizontal lines that are on the pieced unit. I'm going to take my tool and position this so that my horizontal guidelines down here can be any line. I'm not measuring anything here. What I'm going to be doing is marking. If I take any horizontal line here, line it up with the seam here, that's going to give me the correct angle to draw my future stitching line. So let me do this for you so you can see what it looks like. So I've got the horizontal guideline of 5. Along that seam line, I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to mark a line that's coming through, directly through the seam intersection, right there. It's kind of at the same angle as the seam is. Now to do the one on the other side, you can either rotate your tool, find, again, it can be any horizontal line. I'm looking at the horizontal line of 4 here. I'm going to look at the edge of the tool, make sure that it's going right there, right through that point, that seam. And when I line those pieces up, the horizontal line, make sure that I mark this at 60 degrees. The edge of the tool right there, through the seam intersection, guarantees that I'm going to have a nice shaped unit when I'm finished. So this shape, when we're looking at it, is technically, it's called a parallelogram. There are two sides parallel to each other, and the two opposite sides are parallel to each other. What we need to do in order to be able to create our finished shape is we need to take the 5-inch strip that we cut from our third fabric, and we need to cut a parallelogram out of it that's going to match that. You're thinking, oh my gosh, she's throwing geometry words at me. It's okay. It's okay. All the information is on your chart. When you look at your chart, the last column tells you the size that you need to subcut your 5-inch strip into a parallelogram that's going to match the strip that you've just pieced together and marked. The key element here, when we did those subcuts on our pieced unit, the strips were wrong side up. When we do the subcuts on our parallelogram strip, the strip must also be wrong side up. If you're working with batiks, this is not an issue. But if you're working with a printed fabric and you want this to be your right side, make sure that you do that. And one of the things that I do on my technique sheet is I always take I usually use an expo marker. And if there's something that I need to focus on, what I like to do is mark it on there so I pay attention to it going forward in my instructions. So once I have this set up, the first thing that I'm going to do is double check to make sure that I'm cutting the parallelogram going in the same direction that I'm directed to in the technique sheet. And again, I'll touch on how you do this for left-handed. So on the diagram, it's having me cut an angle going in this direction. So I'm going to cut an angle going in that same direction. How do I do that? I'm simply lining up a horizontal guideline along there. I can easily cut kind of a backward angle for me by simply placing a regular ruler against that, moving that out of the way, finding my cutter, and making the cut. That's pretty simple. For left-handed, what you would do, instead of placing your strip horizontally on the mat, what we recommend for left-handed cutting is that you place that strip vertically on the mat so that you can then do exactly the same thing. You can place any horizontal guideline on the edge of the strip, place a companion ruler up against it, and then comfortably cut your 60-degree angle. So just be aware that those instructions are there for those of you who happen to be left-handed. So now that you've set up that 60-degree angle, the next thing is to subcut this into those large parallelograms. When I consult the chart, it says to subcut these at 6 inches. This is different. This is 5, but the subcut is 6. I happen to have a 6-inch ruler here that makes it super simple to be able to subcut these. Again, I like to put a 60-degree angle along here, but primarily I'm lining up my edge of my tool with the edge that I just cut, find my rotary cutter, and subcut those parallelograms. You'll need 1 parallelogram for every piece unit that you have. And you can kind of see they're basically mirror images of each other, so that when you put them right sides together, technically they should all match perfectly, but you know what? I'm not worried if they're off a little bit because everything is oversized and I'm going to get to trim it down when I'm all done. So this is your next step. Once you have your plain parallelogram cut, put your piece parallelogram over top. If they were much bigger than this, I'd probably put a pin or 2 in there. And then remember those lines that we marked, those are the stitching lines that we're going to use when we head over to the sewing machine. So once you have the stitching on the lines that you drew, you're going to simply trim them apart. I just use a tool that has a 1/4 inch line on it, place that 1/4 inch line right on the line that I stitched, and when I cut them apart, you're going to see there's a little bit of waste in the middle, but it's negligible. So once you've done your stitching and your cutting, you're going to see that you have a shape that looks like this. We recommend that you press that seam toward the larger triangle. That is the path of least resistance. You could press it open if you wanted to, but this is now an oversized diamond. How do we go about trimming this down? The key is remembering what size units we were making. We were making 4-inch finished star 60 units. That'll make this diamond end up being 8 inches. So what I'm going to look at on my tool are my 4-inch diagonal diamond point guidelines. They come down right there. Those guidelines are going to be placed logically right on the seam lines for that star 60 unit. One is here, one is here. What I should also see is that I've got a 4 1/4 inch horizontal guideline on that seam. So let me get that lined up, and I'm going to come up, trim one end, come back and trim the other. You can tilt this off to the side if it feels more comfortable to cut it that way. Once you have the star 60 portion of the diamond trimmed, the next thing is to rotate this around and place those diamond point guidelines, those 4, right at the tip, right where where if there were another Star 60 in there, they would match. But also look at that 4¼ inch horizontal guideline going across there. So the 4 meets there, the 4¼ meets right there. And when I do that trimming, I now have a perfectly sized diamond shape that I can go on to build many different Star 60 units. So now that you can see how easily and quickly you can create bunches of these units, both the Star 60 and the shaded 60 units, you can begin to incorporate these shapes into your future quilts, kind of like we did in this quilt behind me that we call Radioactive. Run right over to your quilt shop, pick up the Star 60 tool if you don't have it, pick up your Power Strip 60 technique sheet. Of course, if they don't have those items, you come directly to us and we'll ship them out to you as soon as we can. Good luck with all your future quilting projects and take care, everybody.